Hi, everybody. We're back for another play of the day. Today, we are going to be looking at Reginald Rose's 12 Angry Men. This is a really good one. I actually put the date as 1958, but this is a hard one to date because it is adapted from a teleplay, so like a TV movie that he wrote in 1954. So there's the 1954 production, but then there's 1958. It's the first time that it was adapted for the stage, and I pretty much always date my plays of the day with the first year that they appeared on stage. That's why Cherry Orchard was actually written in 1903 but didn't go up until January of 1904, so I put the date 1904. So 1958 is the first time that this made it to stage. And as little as happens in terms of full plot, it's actually beautifully intense. I love this play. What happens is at the beginning, you are looking at a dark jury room. So there's just like a door with a pane of glass in it, and backwards on it, it says jury so that it can be read from the outside. And there's maybe a window with some blinds on it. And there's a huge table with 12 chairs. And that's the whole thing. And from outside of the room, you hear this judge, and he's like, "Jurors, it's now your time to go back and deliberate the case against this person who is accused of the murder of this person. And if you find this person guilty, he will receive a mandatory death penalty." It's weird because he's talking about murder and death penalties, but he also seems bored out of his mind. And then the lights come on in the room and the door opens, and these 12 jurors come walking in. They look like they're laid out a little bit weird here. That's because while all of them are an important part, it's really a story that is framed by juror number 8 and juror number 3. They are the opposing forces in what's about to become a crazy drama. Juror number 1 is also up there because he is the foreman, meaning he pretty much runs what's going on in the room, so he's a pretty important part too. They come into the room. They are covered in sweat. It is 1954. It's New York City, dead middle of summer. They're unbuttoning their ties are coming undone. They're unbuttoning their shirts. They got all this the energy is dead. And they're like, "Well, we have to pick a foreman." And they're just like, "Just do it. Just be the foreman." It is hot. It's been a long day. And the only saving grace that they have is they all know this person on trial is guilty. So they are ready to just convict him, send him off to the death penalty, and call it a day. They just want to get out of this hot, gross building. So juror number 1 says, "Okay, I'll be the foreman." And he says, "Let's vote. Let's make it an anonymous vote, and everybody just write guilty or not guilty." Now, the important thing to know about this is in the court system with a jury, if everyone doesn't agree, it's referred to as a hung jury, meaning that it's a mistrial, so it doesn't count. So the one rule here is that they all have to agree. And everybody takes out a piece of paper, they write it, they like drop it in this person's hat, and they shake it up, and they start looking. And they're like, "Guilty, guilty, 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 not guilty." And everybody's like, oh, what are you doing? Like, why we gotta stay here? Who put that in there? I don't care if it's anonymous. Who did it? Who did it? And everybody's really angry because there's like juror number 7 who's in a baseball cap because he's planning to go to the Mets game later, and they're all just so tired and they want to go, and they're like, who did it? And finally, this guy down at the far end raises his hand. He's juror number 8. I do want to step back for a second and say you never learn these jurors' names. Through the entire script, they are just like 1, 4, 8, 4, 8, 1, 2. Like, that's how the script looks. They don't have names. So juror number 8 raises his hand and he's like, I think we are looking at a defendant who is 17 years old, has a horrible lawyer who put no effort into cross-examination, who didn't even look at the holes that are in this case. And we are about to send a 17-year-old boy to death row. The least we can do is talk about it for 5 minutes. And they're like, what's there to talk about? He's guilty. They had all these witnesses that saw what he did and know that it was him. They have people that heard him arguing with his father, which is the victim. And they've got all of the evidence. He did it. Why do we need to stay 5 minutes? He's like, all I'm asking is 5 minutes. I think we can give this kid 5 minutes. And they're like, all right, you have 5 minutes. He's like, okay, there are a lot of holes in this case. A lot. And we need to look at those because we don't have to find him to be innocent. We just have to find that he is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That there is no way that this was flawed, that we are 100% sure that he is guilty. Until then, we have to presume he is innocent. And they're like, yeah, we got the speech from the judge. Okay. And he goes, all right. And he goes to this blackboard. And I already just wrote it out for you. But there was the lady. She lived in her apartment. It was across the elevated train tracks from the victim's apartment. It was a really hot night. She had all of her windows open. She hears yelling from the victim's apartment. It's furious. It's screaming. She goes up and she looks out the window and she sees the guy arguing with his son. All of a sudden, a train comes through. And she hears a scream while the train comes through, but she can't see because of the train. But she hears this scream, and then by the time the train has passed, she doesn't see anyone in the apartment. And they're like, yeah, we know. We heard her say all that. And he's like, yeah, so I'm looking at this, and I'm just saying that train came through. She couldn't see. We all live near these elevated train lines. How did she hear a scream? And they're like, what are you talking about? She's like, she was right there. It's like, when a train passes, you can't hear a scream in your own apartment. When you're down on a subway platform and a train is passing through on the express track, you can't hear the person next to you talk. How did she hear this scream that she talked about? And they're like, well, maybe she's just remembering it wrong. Maybe she just remembers the fight. He's like, yeah, but then we have to ask ourselves, what else is she remembering wrong? And the guys are like, you done? He's like, I'm done. And they're like, all right, we're going to vote again. Everybody gets a vote. Guilty, not guilty. So everybody puts the paper in the hat. Guilty, 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 not guilty, 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 not guilty. Oh, what the hell? All of a sudden, juror number 9 raises his hand. He's a very old man. And he's like, well, I think that my colleague, number 8, has a point. In one story, he pointed out to me that there are inconsistencies. We're talking about a young man's life now, aren't we? So I think we should hear him out to make sure that we're making the right choice. So now everybody's stuck in the room. They're mad. Number 7, he might not get to his baseball game. And slowly, number 8 starts laying out the case that the defendant's attorney didn't bother to lay out. There was another witness. That witness heard people like yelling in the apartment down the hall. So he came out of his apartment. He was going down the hall. He heard a scream. Then he sees the boy come running out of the hallway, out into the hallway, and watches him run to the stairs. And they're like, yeah, we were there. We heard it. We're still here talking about it. And he's like, that man's on crutches. And they're like, uh-huh. And he's like, according to the blueprint that we were all shown of the size of these apartments, according to what he was saying he heard and where he did, he was like, why don't we, juror number 4, why don't you grab some crutches. Let's see how far you can travel in the amount of time that would have taken. And they do this whole demonstration, and they realize that he might have heard the yelling, he might have gotten up to get there, but there was no way he could get to that door in time to see the boy run down the hall. And they're like, why would he lie? No, maybe he doesn't feel like he was lying. Maybe he got there just in time to see the back of someone running down the stairs, but he can't prove that back belongs to that person. This is a 17-year-old Latino boy. How does he know that that's the 17-year-old Latino boy he saw? He never saw his face. We just proved that. And they're like, yeah, but this boy had the knife. And he's like, he had a knife. There wasn't any blood on it. And they're like, yeah, but it's a very specific knife. And juror number 8 pulls out an exact replica of the knife and stabs it in the table. And they're like, where'd you get that? And he's like, I was walking past a corner vendor. I literally bought it off a vending cart this morning. And they're like, what are you up to? Why are you doing this? You start to build a case. That's not your job. Your job is just to be a juror. He's like, well, no one else was doing it, and I feel like we're talking about a kid's life. Here's what's also starting to happen, though. Juror number 9 says, I think we should hear this out. And people are like, well, of course you think that. You don't even got a family you got to go back home to. And they're like, this kid's Hispanic. He probably wasn't even born in this country. This is the kind of people we need to protect ourselves against. And juror number 10 is like, I wasn't born in this country, but I have become a citizen. Are you saying America is not better because of the people who have moved here? And they're like, nah, buddy, we're not talking about you, but we're just... So slowly, everything about this kid, we're starting to uncover the prejudices they had against him. That he's Latino, that he's very poor. Some of the richer people on the jury are like, well, because you can't trust poor people because all they do is commit crimes. And they're like, you heard yourself say that, right? that he is young and so they can't trust him. That all of these things are coming together and we're seeing this ageism and this racism and this nationalism, and it's all coming to a head. And after it's not working on lashing out against the kid, and as they're losing ground, it starts lashing out on each other. They're now ageist against each other. They're now like racist against each other. And all of this prejudice is bubbling to a head. And finally, number three, just right at the end of Act One, he's like, buddy, you're sitting here. You've now got 6 not guilty votes. Because, of course, they keep voting and it keeps being like, I don't think he's so guilty. And it's like he's now got 6 not guilty votes. And what you're overlooking is there's a kid out there who murdered his father. And we're going to let him go because some bleeding heart here in the room wants for us to consider what might have gone wrong. Sure, maybe the lady didn't hear the scream. Maybe the guy didn't make it to the door. But what if one of them did? What if all of this lines up and is tough enough that we should know? And he's like, but do we know without a reasonable doubt? And he's like, I do. I know without a reasonable doubt that kid, no matter what color, no matter how rich, no matter how old, murdered his father in that apartment. We heard people and people talking about it, and you're going to let him go. He's like, I'm not the only one saying this. Juror number 3 punches juror number 8, and the stage goes dark. All right, this is why I'm picking this play. We're at intermission right now, so just take an intermission with me. This play is an amazing example of what is called real time. Real time means it never cuts away from the action. It never says, all right, lights go down, lights come up, they're walking in the next morning. That's not real time. That can still be chronological time. But real time is when a play is like from the moment that the lights come up to the moment that the lights go down, there is no break in the action. It just happens in that 2 hours of time. You are watching a story that took 2 hours to happen in the world. So then I say we go to intermission, and you're like, but Smith, doesn't that mean that it breaks? Oh no, Reginald Rose is a step ahead of you, my friend. In the program, it tells you Act 2, 2 seconds later. Come back from intermission, curtain goes up, lights come on, juror number 8 on the floor. People run up, they grab juror number 3. No time elapsed in that 15 minutes that you bought M&Ms and went to the bathroom. So it continues to go. And it's just full of all these holes in this case, but it's not about the case anymore. Now it's about who hates this kid for what reason. And how does that start to play out between them? Because I tell you, when that juror number 10, who is an immigrant who's now a citizen of the US, is voting no and saying he's not guilty, there are people in that room that are like, and this is why immigrants shouldn't be allowed to become citizens and be on juries. And they're also all starting to hear it. They're starting to see their bad behaviors, and they're calling each other on it. And begrudgingly, they're all saying, like, yeah, I brought this prejudice into the room with me. I looked at that kid and I decided he was guilty because he was an immigrant, because he was Latino, because he was 17. I decided all of this when he walked into the defendant's table. Even if he had a great lawyer, I wasn't going to change my mind until I'm being forced to face my own prejudice right now. And it finally gets down to let's take a vote. 11 votes not guilty. And one person, guess who, is still saying guilty. And they're like, you see what's happened. You see all these holes. How can you possibly call him guilty? And he's like, because everybody is thinking about that kid. Everybody is thinking about prejudice. Everybody's putting all these labels on everything, and nobody is thinking about his father. And they're like, come again? And that's when we find out that juror number 3 had a teenage son who walked out on him. They had a horrible relationship. They had a big argument. And a few years ago, his son punched him to the floor and left. And he hasn't heard from him since. And he's like, you don't know what it feels like for your son to betray you until it happens. I know what that father must have felt like with his son treating him with no respect, with his son just doing whatever he wanted. I know that, and I'm going to stand up for that father. And then juror number 8's like, but this isn't your son. You don't know this father. You don't know what was going on here, and we have shown that none of the witnesses did either. And juror number 3 is just getting so upset, like heart attack upset. And he's like, no, I can't. You gotta stand up for the father. No one's standing up for the father. And then juror number 3 starts crying, which is weird because he is like the mean one and the aggressive one. And suddenly he just breaks and he starts crying and he like slumps down to the table and he's crying and he quietly says, not guilty. And that's the end of the play. It's about this one guy realizing, because this wasn't prejudice against him for being too young or being Latino or being an immigrant. This was prejudice held deeper. And it's like the closer you are to what has made you prejudiced and has colored your vision to prejudge that person, the harder it is to let go. But by the end, all these men are walking out of this hot, sweaty room that heat had to like also be like playing up their tempers, and they're just and they walk out and now they all kind of understand what they walked in with. And it's really good. It's interesting because this was written in 1954 and women were not yet allowed to be on juries. You may wonder why it's only men. Women weren't allowed to be on juries. And Reginald Rose has gone back and he's adapted this play a few times. And one of them in particular is called 12 Angry Jurors, where he does bring women into the room. I'll be honest, I've never seen it. But you know what I don't want to see? I don't want to see Steel Magnolias with a man in it. There's an energy in the play Steel Magnolias, 6 women in a beauty shop. There is an energy that happens when everyone is of the same gender. And if a man walks in that room, Steel Magnolias is not the same play. Their behavior and their connection and their humor and all of it changes. And I feel the same way about this play. I think men change their behavior in front of women. I think if women are present, that punch is probably not going to be a punch at the end of Act 1. I think they would like hold back a little bit. So I really, really like this version where it's all men because it just gets the testosterone and like the aggression, and there's no women in there to like pull them back and calm them down. So yeah, I really, really like this play. There is a fantastic TV adaptation that came out in 1999 that was, I think, made for HBO. You could probably find that one pretty easily if you really want to see a great production of this. All right, have a good day.